Hello, everybody. I just came back from the Netherlands about 2 weeks ago, as I am filming this. Um, and I was studying there for about 4 months, from January to May. And I wanted to make this video to discuss with you guys my overall experience in studying the Netherlands. This is my only orange shirt that I ever bought from the country, as well as my overall time in Europe and traveling Europe. And yeah, let's just hop right into it. I don't know what else to say. Please excuse my previous self as I was still coming to terms with the fact that I had left. It seemed like such a long but short journey of meeting so many new people and experiencing so many new things. But regardless, let's get into why I went to the Netherlands in the first place. So, within the Netherlands, there is this university called Wageningen University, or as I like to pronounce it to my American audience, Wageningen. And the reason why I wanted to go to that university was because, as someone who is in environmental science, which is closely associated with agriculture, um, Wageningen is actually one of the best schools to go to for not only within agriculture but environmental sciences. So I just wanted to get a taste of what studying at one of the best universities was like. I always like to take rankings with a side of salt, but that doesn't negate the fact that Wageningen is a very good school. So that was a key motivator for me wanting to go to the Netherlands. The other motivator was because, as someone who is an American exchange student, oftentimes when you go to Europe, you want to be able to experience the vast array of other countries that are surrounding your host country. So that's what I did. And the reason why I chose the Netherlands, another reason why I chose the Netherlands was because it was sort of in a central location within Europe. So it acted as a good jumping off spot for me. Lastly, the other thing was the Netherlands, or the Dutch, are very well known for their ability to manipulate water to their will, if you will. Their country, while being very small, has been able to evade flooding despite being very flat and close and low to the sea level. And this has been done due to various engineering feats that the Dutch have done to basically will the sea to their, will. They've built various dikes, dams, rivers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, to be able to not only evade being flooded, but also use it to their benefit when it comes to agriculture and all that. Pardon the change in location. I had to change where I was filming because like the sun was coming in and out, and it was like messing with the lighting. Plus, my laundry just got done, so I had to wear this, of course. But back to what I was saying. So, studying at Wageningen University as an exchange student was quite an amazing time because, for one, when you go on an exchange, it's kind of like reliving freshman year all over again. You're in a new environment, a new school environment, and you have a want to make friends, and so it's kind of like a redo for about like 4 months. When it came to the Dutch university curriculum compared to what I was used to back at home, there wasn't a whole lot of difference in terms of how classes were taught and like projects and everything, but there was still a difference in terms of time duration of the class. So basically, at Wageningen University, typically they would be like all day long, depending on the period, or you would at least have two classes that would take up the entire day of various activities like practicals, which are like essentially labs, or like group projects working together, so like self study time or just lectures. Whereas in the US, you usually have like a few classes per day, but it's like spaced out, so you have like a lot of breaks in between and everything like that. So it's more of kind of like a go at your own pace, whereas like in Wageningen, it's like kind of like high school all over again in terms of like you're expected to go to from class from 8 to like 4 or something like that. Of course, there's like a lunch break in the middle, but that's typically how it was structured at the university. Now, another difference I noticed was basically in terms of the work-life balance. That was probably one of the biggest changes. Was in at Purdue, my home university. Typically I would, depending on the major, I would be studying a lot after school. So I'd spend a lot of late nights doing studying and homework and preparing for projects and final exams and midterms and all that stuff. Especially on the weekends, I'd often be in the library doing that. But at Wageningen, typically there's a very good work-life balance. So like you go from school from 8 to 4, and then that's it. You don't really have any homework or any projects to work on because typically you do it during the school day. And it was really nice because you would often, you actually had a break after school, especially in the weekends, which allowed me to travel a lot because I didn't have any exams or homework to do. Of course, you have the entire grade of a class at Wageningen is dependent usually on just the final exam. Of course, there's like a practical grade added in onto it, but typically it was basically based solely on the exam. So the week before exams, I would start studying, but before that, yeah, again, pretty good work-life balance. The same thing applied to professors because they would work from 8 to 5 or 8 to 4, whatever, and then that would be their work schedule, and that'd be it. They wouldn't respond to emails after that. They wouldn't have office hours after that because in America, I'd have professors respond to some of my emails at like 11 p.m. or at 7 a.m. in the morning. So that was definitely something to get used to because I'm typically used to having professors answer my questions like a few hours later. Another really big thing, kind of on the topic of work-life balance, is what people were involved in after school. So if you go to Purdue, people are involved in a bunch of things. If you ask them like, "Hey, what do you do after school?" or "What are some of the extracurriculars that you do?" They would like give you a bulleted list, like, "I do this, 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 this. I'm in this club, and this club," kind of like to show off that they're very involved and they're very busy, and that it looks really good on their resume. Whereas in the Netherlands, we're kind of like, yeah, I do a few things, like one or two, and then be kind of chill about it. They didn't really feel like they had the need to like prove themselves, which is kind of the difference between like U.S. culture and European culture in general. Is that in America you really have to like make something of yourself. That's kind of the whole push of the American dream, is to get involved into a lot of things, get to know a lot of people, get a lot of experience, so that when you're out in the real world, you will like walk up the corporate ladder essentially. But in the Netherlands, like people are very chill. I mean, in Europe in general, but as where I was in the Netherlands, people are pretty chill. They don't feel like they have to like prove something to you. They're happy where they're at, and they work hard, but they also relax hard. So to talk about my travels, I of course need to start about the first country I traveled to, which was the Netherlands, and the host country that I stayed in. So Dutch culture. What is there to say about Dutch culture? Well, for one, the cuisine is quite bland. There's not a lot of spice to it. The food, bitterballen, which is like fried cheese balls, is pretty good, and stroopwafel is a really good dessert. But besides that, the Dutch not really known for their cuisine, and they admit that. Dutch people themselves are quite direct and down to earth, but they're also really kind, which I like a lot. And 90% of Dutch people speak English quite well because they know that most people in the world aren't going to want to speak Dutch, given that it only really applies to the Netherlands, the northern part of Belgium, and like a few Caribbean islands. So that's very convenient and also kind of like a main reason why I went there. Another thing about Dutch people is that they're quite tall. So I'm 6'1", or 1.85 meters for the Europeans there. But basically, I felt I was like average height. So I had to get used to seeing a lot of like very, very tall people. Like I was usually one of the tallest people in, like a class or like in my general vicinity, but it was it was a lot to get used to being like average height. Something to consider if you're like very insecure about your height or something like that, especially if you're a lot smaller. Like you might get trampled on in the Netherlands. The last thing about Dutch people that kind of threw me off, and something I don't completely appreciate about Dutch culture, is just how exclusive it is. um, Basically, I understand why the Dutch are quite known for being exclusive. It's because typically, when you have a language like Dutch that's just not very well spoken, most internationals around you aren't going to speak Dutch and are kind of expect you to speak English. And so it's nice to be around people who speak the native tongue of you, because you express yourself more easily and you don't have to like think as hard to speak in a secondary language that's not your native one. So I can understand that, but the problem is that it's still kind of, and I'm coming at it from an American's perspective, but it's kind of discriminatory to, like, for example, when I was finding housing, like for people to say Dutch only when they were listing a Facebook house. It's like if that happened in America, like there'd be riots on the streets say if someone said Americans only. And again, I understand where they're coming from, but I don't think it really justifies how kind of exclusive it is, because the other thing is, when you go to university, now I can maybe understand like if you're just listing an apartment, but if you go to university and you're looking for flatmates, like university is the best place to be able to go outside your comfort zone and be able to meet people that you typically wouldn't associate with, which is why I don't agree with the Dutch only kind of Facebook marketplace housing notifications, because it's like you're kind of just isolating yourself from growing into a much better, more diverse, more culturally oriented kind of person, in my opinion. But again, I'm coming from that from an American perspective. You know, my country's been known as the melting pot of all cultures, so I know I have that perspective coming in. But on the other hand, it's like many internationals kind of share the same feeling that I do in terms of when they study in the Netherlands, because as they like to say, if you're not Dutch, you're not much, because it is quite hard to make Dutch friends. I did make a few, but it is quite hard to really get integrated into their kind of culture, because again, you don't speak their language. And so that's one thing to note if you're planning on going to the Netherlands for just travel or for a semester abroad. So now I'm going to transition to traveling all around Europe, whether it be with people or solo, and just kind of what the overall experience was. But I first want to talk about when I first got to Amsterdam. So for a bit of context, I've been around to other countries, mostly within like the Caribbean, Canada, Mexico, around America. And I did do like a week long study abroad to Greece, but that was with a lot of other Purdue students. So it wasn't really like a complete cultural immersion because I was around fellow American students all the time. But when I got to Amsterdam, it was a completely new experience, because when I landed at the airport, it kind of really set in. It's like, I'm not on vacation. I'm here for 4 months. I really need to strap in. Like, I was truly getting the feeling of independence, which was very scary at first because I had never really experienced true independence. College is sort of the college that I went to or go to, Purdue. It's only an hour and a half from home, so I'm not really that far. It's in state, so I'm independent, but I also have a really nice safety net. And even compared to like out of state students, like it's still a big jump. But then again, going to a completely different country where you're no longer under the jurisdiction of the U.S., it's a completely different culture, language, people, environment. It's like it really sets in that like you are completely alone. I often like to describe it as like compared to my great great grandfather came to the United States from Germany when he was 20. I kind of felt like I was like him, because I was like, I just got here. I don't know how to get home. Like, I don't know how to get where I'm going and everything like that. Now, of course, there's this thing called Google Maps, which is very helpful. But for like 5 seconds, I felt like him. So, as I've said before, I traveled around a lot during my semester abroad. So I went to about 17 countries. I don't really want to list them all, because I'll probably list them on like the screen here, because I'd probably forget it if I tried to remember it. But there was quite a few things I learned on my travels abroad. For one, as a native English speaker, it's really nice that English is the global language of the world, because basically that if you think about it, let's say like someone from Brazil is meeting with someone in Greece for like a business meeting. Chances are the Greek is not going to know any Portuguese and the Brazilian's not going to know any Greek, so they meet in the middle with English, and that's kind of how English is so global. Plus, it helps that America is like the greatest importer of cultural influence all across the world, and the history of the British Empire, as terrible as it was essential in spreading English all around the world. So it is quite easy for me to get around to other countries, because the secondary language is always going to be English. Now, of course, I didn't try to become like a stereotypical ignorant American and not speak the other languages. I always, when I travel to other countries, and especially when I was in the Netherlands, I learned quite a few phrases to help get me around and all that stuff. But of course, I wasn't going to be fluent in it when I got to that country for the weekend, which is what I did. I would travel oftentimes on weekends. When I went to France or Switzerland, Geneva, Switzerland, it was easy for me to get around because I know French quite well, somewhat. I need to practice more, but I know a bit of it since I took 4 years of it in high school. The other thing about Europe and just traveling around is that many European cities and countries have great public transportation, or at least much better public transportation compared to the U.S. And so it's easy to get, like when you land at an airport, to take a bus or a metro route to the city center. Whereas usually if you go anywhere around the states, you're going to have to rent a car if you want to get to the center of a city or a state. And so that's really nice that I didn't have to worry about like getting a car anywhere like the bus or the tram or metro is very easy to take in many European cities. Also, European cities are just very walkable and bikeable. So, like, I remember I was in Barcelona. I like walked around that city for like 8 hours. It was so nice. It's such an amazing city to like walk around in, and many other cities were quite amazing. But Barcelona definitely like stuck out. And also in the Netherlands, like Amsterdam's incredible to walk around. I mean, you do have to worry about getting hit by a bike, but besides that, you don't have to worry about getting hit by a Ford F-150 that's the size of like three buildings in America. So that's one pro I would like to say between Europe and America is that Europe is a lot easier to get around without a car. The other thing I really want to talk about is sort of what I was talking about previously about studying at Wageningen is that the work-life balance is a lot more relaxed, a lot more chill. People there they work hard, but they also want to enjoy life. And so that's something that appeals to me more personally because, again, I'm in environmental science. I'm not really in working for the money. I do it because I'm passionate about it, but I also want to be able to enjoy my life. And so it's not necessarily a bad thing that America has a very hustle culture, like a live to work kind of culture, because it is very beneficial if you want to become an entrepreneur or a business CEO or all that stuff. For me, it doesn't work. And so I really like that Europe has a slower change of pace. It feels like you can really enjoy life more. And ultimately, I think that's what matters is that it's not the money that you make, it's just how well you can enjoy life comfortably. Of course, you need some money, but I don't really think that Americans really have the best idea of how to be happy because they think as long as I can get as much money as possible, I'll be happier with each $1,000 I get. Whereas in Europe, it's much more relaxed and much more chilled. Now, the main reason why I wanted to make this video and to get more serious in tone, to really hone in on what my message is, how I view the United States after coming back from Europe. Now, again, I come from the perspective of having only lived in Europe for about 4 months, so I don't know what it's completely like to be a European, much less someone who's Dutch. But I think I've gained a lot of valuable insight in terms of what it's like to be an American, knowing that I've lived outside of America for quite some time. And the main thing, and kind of what I want to hone back into my environmental idea of thinking, is there's a huge difference in terms of between Europe and America in terms of corporate greed. And so, what I mean by this is that corporate greed runs a lot more rampant in the United States than it does in Europe. And that affects a lot of things. For one, obesity. So, in America, about 1 in 3 adults are obese, and it's supposed to reach around 50% in 2030. Now, in the Netherlands, for example, I noticed on a news article I was reading that about 1 in 8 Dutch people are obese. That's still not okay, but that's a much better upgrade than in America. And the reasons for that being are a variety of factors, such as infrastructure, so it's a lot more walkable and bikeable to get around. Food, there's a lot more regulation, there's a lot more cutting out of unnecessary ingredients that are probably even unhealthier that aren't allowed in the Netherlands or Europe that are allowed in the United States, as well as kind of the media in terms of what is presenting to the people in terms of information when it comes to dieting and nutrition and facts and all that stuff. And that's just one aspect of quality of life. The other aspect is can be things like politics, for example. Now, of course, the politics and the politicians in Europe are not perfect, and of course, many people I've talked to who are from very variety of countries within Europe complain about the politics there, about the politicians don't care and all that stuff. But compared to America, the state that America is in, it seems to be a lot better. And what I mean by this is terms of, again, back to corporate greed, a lot of the divisiveness and a lot of the anger around the United States is driven by corporate greed because we are run by 4 media companies that basically dictate how we can get our news. For example, it is more beneficial for companies to provide kind of news coverage that can anger or tap into the emotions of a viewer in America. And that's where a lot of, again, corporate greed is able to flourish much more because A, there's not a lot of regulation around it, and B, it's allowed because that's what we've always been used to. And furthermore, this media and the corporations that run it are very influential in terms of lobbying politicians. And it kind of feels like when I come back to the United States after all the news I've learned while I was abroad and looking back at, the whole political situation that is currently facing our country, especially the up and coming election, it just feels like that no longer does America feel like it represents the people, what we were kind of built on. We were supposed to, our representatives, senators, presidents, Supreme Court judges, mayors, governors, they're supposed to represent us, but that no longer feels like it's the case because it feels like corporations speak much louder in terms of the money that they donate to these variety of politicians, that it feels like America is no longer the country that it once used to be and what it should be. Now, of course, you can argue the same cases in Europe, but in America, I feel like it's a much more extreme, given that I've lived in both areas, and I feel like there's a much bigger difference in terms of America. And again, when it comes to politics, when the multinational, multi-billion dollar companies are able to speak louder, then that means they can lobby politics to favor them, with regardless of what they think of the citizens, and that allows them to make more money at the disregard of us. And I think, for example, my main issue when it comes to the United States is just how environmentally unfriendly it is, because we are the number one economy in the world, but it's often at the expense of the environment. And for example, when it comes to infrastructure that could be very beneficial towards us when it comes to, if you compare it to the Netherlands, it's a lot greener to get around because you can bike, you can take the metro, you can walk, there's a variety of other options. But in America, you have to take the car, essentially. Depending on which city you live in, it's easier to get around by public transportation, but 90% of the time, you have to get around by car. And why is that? Is because the companies of GM and Ford were able to lobby politicians to essentially create cities that were paved for the car, even though they were designed for humans to walk around. And that's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of how corporations have kind of run this country despite us trying to think otherwise. And when it comes to the environment, another issue I take up with is ExxonMobil, for example. They have essentially manufactured the entire climate change denial debate back since the 70s, because they were one of the first companies to discover that climate change was a real thing. And they've influenced not just the United States, but the entire world into having a lot of politicians, a lot of people thinking it's not really that important, it's not real, and all that stuff, because they put profits before people. And once they realized that climate change was going to threaten their way of making money as an oil and gas company, instead of doing something about it, they found that it was much cheaper to not only do nothing about it, but also to add salt to the wound, to lobby politicians, to lobby people to create disinformation campaigns that would further their agenda and postpone climate progress. And that started right here in America. And to kind of bring it back to what I was saying about quality of life when compared to Europe versus the United States, and why I think Europe has a much better quality of life and a much happier, you have a much easier time being happier within Europe. Again, depending on the country, it all comes back to money. And America puts profits before people, where I feel like while Europe still has a lot of things to work on, it feels like it's a much more people oriented before a profit society. And again, I could talk forever on why I feel like the quality of life in America is so much worse than Europe. But I think this still can apply to Europe in terms of what to learn from, and that profits it's not very profitable to be moral, is simply what I'm trying to say. And that comes before the environment, that comes before infrastructure, that comes before food, that comes before the media, all sorts of aspects of life that influence you. If you only put profits before people, you're going to have a much worse way of living. That's simply put. And that should be a warning to many Europeans, in that those countries that are facing, multinational corporations trying to take control of their governments, to be wary of what to look for when it comes to where they get their news from, who gives them their food, like who pays for their health care, et cetera, et cetera. Because if that happens, if corporations begin to take over, then not only is our environment at risk, our way of living is at risk, our schools are at risk, everything like that. And I think America, while I wouldn't say is a failed state, and I feel like there's a lot of things that we can do to change the complete direction of where America is heading. And oftentimes, in some ways, it feels like it is too late. It feels like America has been overrun by profits and at the disregard of its citizens. So to finally end this video and kind of to summarize the complete video itself, which I discussed a lot of points. I had an amazing time in Europe. I met a lot of amazing people. I went to a lot of amazing cities. I had a lot of amazing food, but it also ultimately and most importantly for me changed on how I view America. And as pessimistic as I am very hopeful and very motivated to want to change the country that I live in because I can see what it's like to live in a better society. I'm not saying the Netherlands is the most amazing place in the world or Europe itself, but it feels like a much better improvement because it puts the people first, it puts the environment first, it puts healthcare first, et cetera, et cetera. I could go on. And so ultimately, never stop fighting for what you believe in, especially in the place you live, because it can always be better. As much as it feels like it always get worse, never stop fighting for what you believe in.